If you've ever spent a night in Puerto Rico, you've probably heard it. A piercing two-note call ringing through the darkness. It is the voice of a tiny frog, so iconic that its sound gave the species its name, the common coqui. But this is no ordinary frog. To Puerto Ricans, it is a national symbol, celebrated in books, songs, and poems. To biologists, it is fascinating, a frog without tadpoles. And to many Hawaiians, it has become something else entirely, a noisy invader, disrupting ecosystems and disturbing sleep. So how did this little amphibian become at once a cultural icon, a scientific model, and an invasive species? And what does it tell us about frogs and the complex ways humans relate to them? If you'd like to learn more, check out the document in the description with research papers and image credits. Before zooming in on the common coqui, let's take a step back and look at the broader group. The coqui belongs to the genus Eleutherodactylus, commonly known as rain frogs or robber frogs. Genera like this one have always posed a challenge for the kind of videos I like to make. I prefer to explore each species in a group within a compact, roughly 20-minute episode. But many animals I'd love to talk about, tyrant flycatchers, anoles, or flying lizards for example, share a similar problem. These groups are massive. Eleutherodactylus has around 200 species, making it one of the largest vertebrate genera in the world. Covering every species while keeping the video interesting is simply impossible, and I don't even want to think about the length it would be. Recently, I've even started splitting some genera with only a handful of species into 2 videos, like I did with the New World vultures and the bears in Ursus. So what to do with groups as large as the rain frogs? Broadly, there are 2 approaches. One approach is a wide-angle overview. I have taken this tack with many of the invertebrates I've covered, like tardigrades, comb jellies, or fairy flies. In these groups, many species are poorly known, and differentiating them with the naked eye is often impossible, both factors that lend themselves well to the broad overview. The other approach, the one I'm trying here, is to focus on the best known or most studied species and use them as a lens to explore the wider group. With that in mind, let's finally talk about Eleutherodactylus. The name means free toes, a reference to their lack of webbing. But that's not really the trait that unites the genus. What defines these frogs is their reproductive strategy. Most amphibians have an aquatic tadpole stage, but the rain frogs have moved away from this. Their eggs hatch directly into tiny froglets, miniature versions of the adult, skipping any aquatic phase entirely. Many species also show parental care, which is unusual for frogs. Males often remain with the eggs, keeping them moist, preventing fungal infections, and defending them from predators. Eggs left unattended will have a much lower survival rate. Once the froglets hatch, however, parental care ends and the young must fend for themselves. These adaptations mean that rain frogs aren't tied to ponds or streams. They can live and reproduce in forests, leaf litter, caves, and even urban gardens. And because they don't depend on water, they can colonize new environments more easily than most other frogs. In Puerto Rico, the name coqui is applied not just to a single frog, but to a whole suite of frogs in Eleutherodactylus. There are around 18 species on the island that are called coqui, each with its own call, habitat preferences, and ecological quirks. This remarkable diversity is the result of adaptive radiation, a single ancestral lineage diversified to exploit different microhabitats and ecological niches across the island. Some live in leaf litter, others in tree canopies, caves, or even urban gardens. This partitioning allows so many closely related species to coexist on a small island, illustrating the evolutionary creativity and ecological ingenuity of these tiny frogs. Among them, the common coqui, Eleutherodactylus coqui, stands out. It is abundant, loud, and has become an icon of Puerto Rican soundscapes. Its distinctive 2-note call, Coquí, is instantly recognizable, and it is the species most people think of when they hear the term coqui. But the story of the coqui is not just one of abundance and cultural fame. Many of its relatives are far less fortunate. Some species are now severely threatened with habitat loss, disease, and climate change. The golden coqui, Eleutherodactylus jasper, for example, was last seen in the 1970s and is believed to be extinct. The web-footed coqui, Eleutherodactylus carlschmidti, notable for being the largest coqui and also for its extensive toe webbing, hasn't been observed since the late 1980s. Even the cricket coqui, Eleutherodactylus gryllus, while not yet extinct, has disappeared from much of its historic range. Its decline was sharply highlighted after Hurricane Maria struck in 2016, when surveys in the Coquí State Forest failed to find any individuals at all. Focusing on the common coqui allows us to explore the wider group while highlighting these contrasts. It is a species that thrives where others cannot, with adaptations like direct development and parental care that let it colonize forests, gardens, and even urban areas. Meanwhile, many of its relatives cling to survival in small forest fragments or have vanished entirely. This makes the coqui not just a symbol of Puerto Rican identity, but also a window into the delicate balance of island biodiversity and a reminder that even within a familiar and beloved genus, the fate of species can diverge dramatically. So far, we've looked at the broader group and the many species that carry the name coqui. But now it's time to focus in on the one that everyone knows, the common coqui, Eleutherodactylus coqui. This is the little frog behind the famous call, the one that's become an icon of Puerto Rico. The coqui is not a large animal. Most adults measure between 3 and 5 centimeters long, that's 1 to 2 inches, with females a little larger than the males. That may sound tiny, but for Puerto Rico frogs, the common coqui is actually on the larger side. Their colours range from brown to grey, sometimes with lighter stripes or mottling, sometimes nearly uniform. It's a variable palette, but always turned to one purpose: camouflage. Blending into bark, leaves, or soil helps keep them safe in forests filled with hungry predators. But, of course, camouflage only goes so far when the frog in question is famous for being loud. The name coqui comes directly from the distinctive two-tone call of the males. It sounds like Coquí. The first note is a warning, a territorial claim that tells other males to keep their distance. The second note is a love song, meant to draw in females. Together, they create a chorus that rises every night across Puerto Rico. And what a chorus it is! For such a small animal, the coqui produces an astonishing volume. Their calls can reach up to 100 decibels, almost as loud as a jackhammer, when measured right next to the calling frog. Of course, you don't usually get that close, and in a forest the sound spreads out. But even from a distance, the coqui's voice is unmistakable. It's been described as the heartbeat of Puerto Rico, something every visitor quickly notices, and every Puerto Rican knows by heart. The call is more than cultural background noise, though. It's the center of the frog's social life. Males space themselves out at night, each holding a perch 20 or 30 centimeters above the ground. From there, they call, staking out their territory. Neighboring males often overlap or alternate their calls, creating complex soundscapes that scientists have studied in detail. Females listen in, moving toward the males whose calls appeal to them most. Where do you find these frogs? The short answer is almost everywhere in Puerto Rico. They occur from coastal lowlands to mountain forests, from pristine reserves to roadside ditches and backyard gardens. Unlike many amphibians, the common coqui thrives in disturbed habitats. It can handle cleared land, plantations, and even cities. That adaptability is one reason it has become so abundant, and also why it's been so successful as an introduced species in Hawaii and beyond. But even with their broad distribution, coquis still have preferences. They need moist microhabitats to keep their skin from drying out. During the day, they tuck themselves into leaf litter, bromeliads, tree holes, or crevices in walls. At night, they climb out onto leaves and branches to call and hunt. These daily rhythms of sheltering and calling structure their lives. Reproduction is where the common coqui really demonstrates its mastery of a strategy shared across its genus. Like other rain frogs, it uses direct development. Eggs are laid on land and hatch straight into froglets, bypassing the tadpole stage. But the coqui has refined this approach to remarkable success. Females lay small clutches in carefully chosen hiding places, anywhere humidity is high, under leaves, in soil cavities, or tucked into an axil, the part of a plant where the leaf or branch meets the stem. Males then take over as guardians. A single male tends multiple clutches, hydrating them by pressing his moist belly against the eggs and defending them against predators and mold. Studies show that unattended clutches suffer much higher mortality, underscoring just how important this parental care is. After about 3 weeks, the eggs hatch. At this point, the father's job is done. The tiny froglets scatter into the undergrowth, adding another generation to one of Puerto Rico's most abundant vertebrates. Diet-wise, coquis are classic generalist insectivores. At night, they emerge to hunt small invertebrates, crickets, moths, beetles, ants, spiders, and pretty much anything else they can overpower and swallow. By weight, they're some of the most important insect predators in Puerto Rico, consuming vast numbers every night. That leads to the ecological role. The common coqui isn't just abundant, it's extraordinarily abundant. Studies have found densities of up to 20,000 individuals per hectare in some habitats. In terms of biomass, they can outweigh all the birds and mammals in a forest combined. This makes them a keystone species. Their predation on insects helps shape invertebrate communities, and in turn, they provide food for snakes, birds, and larger frogs. In ecological energy terms, they are a major conduit, converting insect biomass into frog biomass and fueling much of the island's food web. It's worth pausing on that. For all the cultural and symbolic weight carried by the coqui, its ecological importance is just as striking. This tiny frog isn't just a sound in the night, it's one of the dominant players in Puerto Rican ecosystems. A small body multiplied thousands of times over until it becomes the very fabric of the forest. The very same traits that make the common coqui so successful in Puerto Rico have also allowed it to flourish elsewhere, sometimes with unintended consequences. The best known example is Hawaii. The first reports of coquis on the Hawaiian Islands came in the late 1980s, almost certainly introduced through the nursery trade. Plants shipped from the Caribbean to Hawaii carried with them tiny stowaways, eggs hidden in the soil, or frogs clinging to the leaves. At first, their arrival may have seemed unremarkable. After all, frogs are not native to Hawaii, and several other species had already been introduced. But none of those species ever reached the same numbers or stirred the same reaction as the coqui. In Hawaii's mild climate, free from the predators and diseases that regulate its populations in Puerto Rico, the coqui thrived. Densities have reached astonishing levels, in some places estimated at more than 50,000 frogs per hectare, over twice the density in their homeland. They feed voraciously on insects and spiders, raising concerns about impacts on native invertebrate communities and the birds that depend on them. But it isn't just the ecological effects that have attracted attention. The call of the coqui, the sharp, piercing Coquí, is a beloved chorus in Puerto Rico. In Hawaii, it's often considered an intrusion. In quiet rural communities, nights can be dominated by a wall of sound louder than heavy traffic. Some residents and tourists complain that it makes sleep difficult, and that in turn has given the frog an outsized reputation. It has caused property prices to plummet in heavily infested areas, nurseries have struggled under strict quarantine rules, and millions of dollars have been spent on control efforts, all of which have cemented the coqui's status as one of Hawaii's most notorious invaders. And that is a high bar to clear, given the devastation the islands have already experienced at the hands of rats, pigs, and other invasive mammals. We've already seen how the common coqui can be an unwelcome invader in Hawaii, but at home in Puerto Rico, the very same frog is celebrated and fiercely protected in the hearts of the people. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Here, the coqui is more than a species. It's a symbol, a soundtrack, and a source of identity. For many Puerto Ricans, the coqui's nightly chorus is instantly evocative. Its high two-note call can transport someone across the world in an instant. Puerto Ricans abroad often say that hearing recordings of coqui calls brings them straight back home. The sound itself a kind of cultural GPS, a link to forests, backyards, and childhood memories. The frogs appear in folklore, poetry, and songs, celebrated for their persistent voices and their small but mighty presence in the landscape. Their iconic status shows up in all sorts of ways. Coqui imagery appears in art, souvenirs, and commercial branding, and this influence extends into music and literature. For example, the Puerto Rican boy band Menudo featured a song titled Coqui in their movie Una Aventura Llamada Menudo. And the sound of a coqui can be heard in songs like Acicate by Ivy Queen. One striking example is Miranda That Ghost Just Isn't Holy Anymore by the Mars Volta. This song includes about 4 minutes of coqui frog singing, credited right on the album sleeve as the Coquí of Puerto Rico. Children's books like There's a Coquí in My Shoe by Marisa de Jesus Paola or Coquí in the City by Noma Perez also celebrate the frog as a symbol of Puerto Rico. And the devotion runs deep. People fiercely defend the Coquí's place in their neighborhoods. Complaints from tourists about the frog's nighttime calls are practically guaranteed to spark outrage. Even as recently as May 2025, a tourist posted on Reddit asking how to silence the frogs, and Puerto Ricans responded almost instantly, making it very clear where the frog belongs. The Coquí is part of Puerto Rico, and its call is the voice of the island itself. The message is simple. If you don't like it, you can leave. The passion is understandable. For many, it isn't just a sound, it's a reminder of home, heritage, and the continuity of life on the island. But the cultural significance is inseparable from the ecological one. The same qualities that make the Coquí so loud and abundant, its reproductive strategy, adaptability, and ability to colonize new microhabitats, are the qualities that make its song so ever-present. Its biology, in other words, is inseparable from its role as a symbol. This connection between natural history and cultural identity is rare, and it's part of what makes the Coquí so compelling, both scientifically and socially. While the common Coquí thrives, many of its relatives are far more precarious. We have already mentioned some of these, the golden, web-footed, and cricket Coquís, but that list is far from exhaustive. Across Puerto Rico and nearby islands, a number of Coquí species are considered endangered or critically endangered. Some are restricted to tiny habitats, a single mountaintop, a secluded forest fragment, or a particular type of wetland. These micro-endemic species are especially vulnerable. A single hurricane, drought, or disease outbreak can push them to the brink. Emerging threats compound the risk. Urban expansion fragments forests, making it harder for small populations to survive. Hurricanes and other extreme weather events, becoming more frequent with climate change, can devastate tiny habitats almost overnight. Disease is also a common concern. Chytrid fungus has decimated amphibian populations worldwide, and while its effects on Coquí species are still being studied, the potential for serious impact is high. Conservation efforts are underway, but they face serious challenges. Some species benefit from protected areas, where forests remain relatively intact. Researchers monitor populations and conduct surveys to track declines, and community initiatives sometimes focus on habitat restoration or captive breeding programs. However, for many Coquí species, information is still limited, making conservation both urgent and difficult. In the face of these pressures, the story of the Coquís is a reminder of how fragile even seemingly abundant groups can be. The common Coquí may dominate Puerto Rican nights, but its lesser-known cousins reveal the delicate balance that sustains biodiversity on these islands. The common Coquí may dominate the soundscape of Puerto Rico and attract attention worldwide, but it is just one story in the much larger scope of Eleutherodactylus. Across the Caribbean and Central America, countless relatives quietly persist, each adapted to its own niche with many tiny ranges and delicate ecologies. Some thrive like the Coquí, others survive in secret, and some are already lost. Looking at the genus as a whole, the Coquí provides a window into the remarkable adaptability and vulnerability of these frogs. It shows how a species can become abundant, culturally iconic, and even invasive, but also reminds us of the fragility that lies just beneath the surface in many of its cousins. In the end, the common Coquí is a lens through which we can appreciate the wider diversity, the evolutionary ingenuity, and the delicate balance of an entire genus of frogs. The common Coquí may be small, but its story is anything but ordinary. It is a singer of forests and backyards, a cultural symbol woven into the hearts of Puerto Ricans, and a visitor that has reshaped ecosystems far beyond its native range. From the booming choruses across Puerto Rican nights to its challenges in Hawaii, from the thriving common Coquí to its endangered cousins, this genus blurs the line between abundance and fragility. It shows us how a single species can inspire joy, spark controversy, and illuminate the delicate balance of life on islands shaped by isolation, adaptation, and human influence. So perhaps the lesson is not only about protecting the Coquís as they are today, but about understanding the broader tapestry they belong to, the forests they inhabit, the other frogs they share them with, and the culture and stories they have inspired. Saving or studying one species means appreciating the complex web of life it represents. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Coquí. If this video sparked your curiosity, don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and keep learning. There's still so much to discover about the world's rare and remarkable species. And the more we understand, the better our chances of protecting them. Thanks for watching.